Hello, wild wanderers and fellow nature nerds. Arachnophobia is defined as an extreme or irrational fear of spiders. Now, lots of people claim to be arachnophobic, but really they just don't like spiders. But either way, if that's you, I want you to know true arachnophobes are just super creeped out by spiders. Today, I'm not talking about spiders, but I am talking about arachnids. Now, what's the difference, you ask? Well, all spiders are arachnids, but not all arachnids are spiders. So today, I'm going to tell you about a couple of those non-spider arachnids. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, and this is the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. Okay, while today's episode is not about spiders, you do need to understand what makes a spider, so you can see where these non-spider arachnids are similar and where they're different. So here's the basics. A spider has two body segments as opposed to the three body segments that insects have. They don't have antennae and they don't have wings, which is probably good because if you're super creeped out by spiders now, imagine flying spiders. That would be no good. Spiders, of course, have 8 legs. That's one of the defining characteristics. And they have anywhere from 0 eyes, if they live in caves, to 8 eyes, depending on the species. And in fact, the number of eyes and the pattern of eyes is a defining characteristic of different spider species and families. All spiders have fangs, and they produce some sort of venom, although the fangs of most spider species are much too small and much too weak to even penetrate your skin, and only a few species have venom that's what we'd call medically significant. All spiders have silk glands and spinnerets. Now, they don't all make a web, but they do all produce silk and use it for different reasons. Today's episode was inspired by my very first sighting of a solifuge, sometimes called a camel spider, a sun spider, or a wind scorpion. But since they're not a spider and they're not scorpions, I'm going to continue to call them solifuges. But they are super cool. So right off the bat, solifuges don't have spinnerets and they don't produce silk. So right away, we have a major difference between them and true spiders. There's over 1,200 species worldwide. Now, sometimes people say, oh, they're not native to North America. They hitched rides on soldiers coming back from Desert Storm. But that's not true at all. There's about 200 species that are native to North America. And most species of solifuge live in dry climates and feed on ground-dwelling arthropods, carrion, and other small animals. Now, the largest species have a body that's about 3 to 4 inches long, but the average size is closer to 2. Now, like spiders, they have 2 body segments and 8 legs. But if you were to count the legs on a solifuge, it's very likely that you would come up with 10. But they really do have only 8. The first, frontmost pair of appendages are not actually legs, but pedipalps. Pedipalps are sensory organs, kind of like antennae in insects. They're used partially in locomotion, but also in feeding. Now, normally they don't quite touch the ground, but they're held out to detect obstacles and prey. And in that position, they do look like an extra pair of legs or arms. They kind of look like a zombie, classically holding its arms straight out as it walks. At the tips of the pedipalps, solifuges have structures similar to suction cups, and they use those for capturing prey, bringing water to their mouth parts for drinking, and climbing smooth surfaces. As for their actual legs, the frontmost pair of legs are smaller and thinner than the other 3 pair. And for the most part, only the last 3 pairs of legs are used for running. That smaller first pair are used mostly in a sensory role to supplement the pedipalps. And also when it comes to running, solifuges are quick. Speed is one of the things that they're known for. They can hit a top speed of 10 miles an hour, which is slow if you're driving a car, but about the same as the average running human, maybe just a little bit slower than the average arachnophobic running human. But before we leave the solifuge's legs, on the underside of the last pair of legs, solifuges have these fan-shaped organs called racket organs. What exactly are they? Well, they're sensory organs. Possibly chemoreceptors, so basically a nose underneath their legs, but they also might be used to detect vibrations in the soil or threats or prey or mates. Another difference between spiders and solifuges, remember that spiders have fangs which are used for injecting venom into their prey, but the mouth parts of solifuges are more like scissors, actually two pairs of scissors side by side, and they don't have venom. But these mouth parts are surprisingly strong. They can shear hair or feathers from vertebrate prey or carrion and cut through skin and thin bones like those of small birds. Some species in Africa actually have names that translate as hair cutter or beard cutter, which reflects a belief that they clip hair from sleeping humans and animals to line their subterranean nests. But you can file that one under urban legend. Many solifuge species stridulate with these mouth parts, making a rattling noise that's used for communicating with each other or helping to ward off threats. Now, most species have two large central eyes that are used in hunting prey and avoiding predators. But there's also vestigial eyes present. In many species, they're atrophied, but in some species, there's both nerves and pigments present, so they might still be able to use them to detect movement or changes in light intensity. It kind of reflects their common link with spiders. Now, spiders breathe using book lungs, which is a respiratory organ that looks a lot like the pages of a book. But solifuges have well-developed tracheas and breathe through something called spiracles. They're tiny holes that are found along the abdomen or other parts of their body. Now, there's some urban myths about solifuges. Some I've already mentioned. Frequently, it's an exaggeration about their size. Pictures on social media often used forced perspective to make them look huge, but also their speed or dangerousness, which I think is par for the course with us humans. When we encounter something that we find creepy or scary, we tend to make it bigger and badder when we retell the harrowing tale of how the monstrous solifuge almost ate us alive. But the biggest urban myth about solifuges has to do with them chasing people. Now, this is a misunderstanding of a common behavior, kind of similar to the escorting behavior of coyotes that I talked about a couple episodes ago. The name solifuge derives from Latin and translates as those who flee the sun. Basically, solifuges want to stay in the shade during the day. If you're standing around casting a shadow, they might rest in the shade of, well, you. And if you start walking, they may come along, not because they're following you or chasing you specifically, but rather the shade that you've been so kind to create on a hot summer day. And as you might recall, solifuges probably run faster than you do, so you can see how this myth got started. Now, the other non-spider arachnid I want to talk to you about today is one that you're probably more familiar with, the harvestman, although you might know him better as daddy longlegs. Now, there's some species of cranefly and some long-legged spiders that are also referred to as daddy longlegs, depending on where you live. But I think that most of us, at least here in the United States, use this name for the critter that looks vaguely spider-like, but with a body shaped like a tic-tac and 8 hair-like legs. This daddy longlegs is scientifically called an opilione, but commonly called a harvestman. Why harvestman? Because a lot of times they showed up in the late summer or early fall, harvest time. And in merry old England, there was a superstition that if you killed one, there would either be a bad harvest that year, which is a myth I can get behind, or rain the next day. Other myths about them was that if you held them by 7 of their 8 legs, the 8th leg would point the way to lost cattle. While it looks like they have a single body segment, like their spider and solifuge cousins, they actually do have 2, but the connection between them is so broad that it looks like a single oval structure. Typically, the body length is under a 1/4 inch, so like I said, the body looks like a tic-tac. Like solifuges, harvestmen have no spinnerets and no silk glands, again setting them apart from spiders. Now about those long legs. There are 8, unless there are fewer for reasons that I'll talk about in a minute. But the second set are longer than the rest and function more like antennae or feelers, kind of like the pedipalps of the solifuges. Harvestmen also have pedipalps, but they're not as prominent as the solifuges. And when they capture prey, they secrete a glue-like substance that helps them stick to their prey. And like solifuges, harvestmen breathe through spiracles, not book lungs. Now, I'm going to bust a myth here. From time to time, especially nowadays with social media, you might see something along the lines of, the harvestman is the most venomous animal in the world, but its fangs are too short and its mouth too round and small to bite a human, rendering it harmless. The only part of that statement that's even close to being true is that their mouth parts are too small and weak to break human skin. First of all, they don't have venom. It's hard to be the world's most venomous animal if you don't even have the main ingredient. Secondly, they don't have fangs like spiders, nor do they have the scissors-like mouth parts of solifuges. Instead, and this is really kind of cool, their mouth parts are three-segmented and like grasping claws, like the claws of a crab, but really, really tiny, and mouths. Seriously, how cool is that? So what do harvestmen eat with their tiny claw mouths? Most are omnivores, feeding on small insects, plant material, and fungi. Some are also known to scavenge or feed on dung. Now, this broad range is unusual for an arachnid, which tend to be pure predators. In another departure from their solifuge cousins, the eyes of harvestmen can't form images, so they usually ambush their prey, although sometimes they will actively hunt. Also, unlike most other arachnids, harvestmen don't have a sucking stomach or a filtering mechanism. Instead, they ingest small particles of their food. Now, when it comes to defense from predators, harvestmen have a few tricks. All of the Opilione species are capable of releasing strong-smelling and bad-tasting chemicals. In fact, they sometimes gather in large numbers, anywhere from a couple of hundred to tens of thousands, and it's thought that the reason is both for protection from weather and protection from predators. Like herd animals, gathering in large numbers reduces the odds of any one individual getting eaten. Plus, then they have the combined chemical defenses of the whole group. Some species are brightly colored, known as aposematism, something I've talked about with other animals, a warning to predators that they taste bad. Although most of the ones here are what's called cryptic, a fancy way to say camouflaged. They try to blend in. Some species have spines that they can use defensively. Some species run away from predators, some will freeze, and some will play dead when confronted. But here's my two favorite defense mechanisms in harvestmen. The first is called bobbing. Bobbing is just what it sounds like, bouncing the body rapidly. The idea is to confuse the predator and make it hard to identify just exactly where their body is. It's kind of like a boxer ducking and weaving, and they'll also do this when they're in those large groups, which makes it even harder for the predator. The second is called autonomy. Autonomy is the voluntary amputation of a leg in response to being captured. Remember I said that you might count less than 8 legs on a harvestman? The detached leg will continue to twitch for anywhere from a minute to an hour, hopefully distracting the predator and letting the harvestman escape. It's particularly effective against ants and spiders, but it's also a costly strategy. That leg doesn't grow back, and having fewer legs reduces the harvestman's speed, climbing ability, and sensory perception. Also, if the harvestman loses one of those second set of legs, the ones they use like antenna, they probably won't survive. Okay, fellow nature nerds, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Remember, all spiders are arachnids, but not all arachnids are spiders. Solifuges and harvestmen are fascinating critters who can't and don't even want to hurt you. If you see one, take a close look and appreciate how truly amazing these little critters are. If you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron. You can find all the information at patreon.com/dispatches from the forest. If you want to send me an email or donate via PayPal, you can do that at dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. And check out our merch store and all it has to offer. You can find all that at cafepress.com/shop/dispatches from the forest. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. The Dispatches from the Forest podcast is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.